I want you to start by visualizing the physical architecture of the future.
Okay.
Because when we talk about artificial intelligence, we tend to use these really ethereal, invisible terms.
Right, like the cloud.
Exactly. The cloud, neural networks,
Oh,
machine learning.
it's very abstract.
Yeah, it sounds like magic. But the reality is it's incredibly heavy. It's physical.
Highly physical.
So I want you to picture the actual infrastructure running the global AI economy right now.
The hardware.
The hardware. You're probably seeing sprawling warehouse-sized data centers in the high deserts of the American West, right?
Yeah, or endless rows of server racks just humming away in Silicon Valley.
Or maybe, massive industrial tech hubs clustered around power grids in Northern Europe.
Sure, that's the standard mental image.
Right. Now, take that entire image, that multi-trillion-dollar hyper-advanced epicenter of human computation, and just drop it directly into the highest, most rugged mountain range on the planet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I want you to drop it into the Himalayas.
It really forces a complete mental reset, doesn't it?
Completely.
Because when we consider a place like Nepal, the global imagination immediately defaults to a very specific set of associations.
Yeah, like mountaineering expeditions scaling Everest.
Right, or spiritual retreats, ancient temples.
A degree of, profound natural isolation.
Exactly. The absolute last thing that comes to mind is the bleeding edge of the artificial intelligence arms race.
Which is exactly why this deep dive is going to be so fascinating.
It's a huge pivot.
We are making a massive cognitive leap today. Our mission is to dissect a roadmap that challenges, everything we think we know about how developing nations fit into the modern technological boom.
And the source material for this is really unique.
It really is. This singular, incredibly ambitious document was published on May 20, 2026 on a blog called Democracy for Nepal.
By an author who goes by Paramendra.
Right. And he lays out a vision that goes way, way beyond a typical startup pitch.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just an app.
Not at all. We are looking at a hyper-capitalist blueprint proposing triple-digit economic growth.
Which is staggering.
Yeah. It outlines the creation of a homegrown tech champion, a company called Solara.
Solara.
And this company is designed to reach a $1 trillion valuation.
A trillion with a T.
With a T, and the end game. Using the equity of that single company to totally eradicate extreme poverty in Nepal within 10 years.
It's, to really grasp the gravity of this text, we have to look at the structural framework it's proposing.
Right.
Because in global economics, there is a very well-worn, almost universally accepted ladder of development.
The traditional path.
Exactly. A developing nation typically starts by stabilizing its agricultural sector.
Right, making sure people are fed.
Yeah. Then it slowly transitions into light manufacturing.
So textiles, garments, basic assembly.
You got it. If that's successful, it moves up to heavy industry, and then, generations later, it attempts to break into the services and knowledge economy.
Takes decades.
Usually, yes. But the roadmap we are examining today proposes something radical. It's proposing skipping those middle rungs entirely.
Just leaping right over them.
Yes. The author is suggesting that a nation can bypass the sweatshops and the steel mills and jump straight into the global, AI-driven digital economy.
And what's crucial to point out for you listening is that this isn't some polite NGO-style proposal asking for a slight increase in foreign aid to build a few schools.
No, definitely not.
This is a highly aggressive, deeply capitalistic strategy.
Very much so.
Whether you're an investor trying to understand where the next global tech hub might emerge, or you're just fascinated by the macroeconomic theory of how nations build wealth, this text is going to scramble your assumptions.
It really challenges the current consensus.
Because the prevailing narrative is that the AI revolution is just going to make wealthy nations vastly wealthier.
Right, leaving the developing world further behind.
Exactly. But this roadmap takes that exact premise and flips it on its head.
The underlying thesis here asks a very dangerous but very interesting question.
What's that?
What happens to the balance of global power when a developing nation realizes it is sitting on the exact physical resource that the trillion-dollar tech monoliths in the West desperately need to survive?
Ooh, I like how you phrased that. But let's ground this before we get too far into the stratosphere.
Fair enough.
Because you can't build a trillion-dollar company on unstable ground.
No, you definitely cannot.
Before we talk about servers and artificial intelligence, we have to talk about the political bedrock.
The foundation.
Right. You simply cannot build massive multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects if the government in charge keeps rewriting the tax code.
Or shuffling cabinet ministers every 6 months.
Exactly. Capital runs away from uncertainty.
It always does.
The author acknowledges this upfront, which I appreciate. The text explicitly states that for decades, Nepal's missing ingredient hasn't been potential.
Right.
It's been, and I'm quoting here, consistent, results-oriented governance.
And the historical context here is really vital.
Let's get into it.
The roadmap points directly to a period of severe political gridlock.
Which isn't unusual, right?
No, it's a very common syndrome for nations that undergo major democratic transitions.
Right, when you dismantle an old regime.
Exactly. When you dismantle an autocracy, you often enter a chaotic vacuum where competing factions spend decades just fighting over the rules of the game.
Just trying to figure out how to govern?
Yeah. But the author identifies a very specific, very recent turning point that changes the equation.
And the text refers to it as the Gen Z Kranti.
Yes.
Now, for those not familiar with the term, Kranti translates to revolution.
Right. But we should be clear, this isn't an armed uprising.
No, it's not a violent thing.
The document describes a demographic shift, a massive public mandate for a completely new wave of leadership.
A generational changing of the guard.
Exactly. The text specifically highlights the election of Kathmandu's mayor, Balin Shah, as the prime example.
Okay, so a local leader stepping up.
Yeah, and the argument is that this youth-driven demand for basic competence and clean administration has finally created the stable political foundation required to launch an economic revolution of this scale.
But let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because I imagine you listening at home might be feeling a bit skeptical right now.
It's a big claim.
It is. And the text itself mentions the massive 2005-2006 democracy movement in Nepal.
The one that ended the autocracy.
Right. That was a historic shift that ended an autocratic monarchy. At the time, everyone heralded as the dawn of a new, prosperous era.
Everyone was very optimistic.
But according to the author's own timeline, what actually followed was years of infighting, corruption, and stalled development.
A lot of gridlock.
So if I'm a global investor reading this roadmap, why on earth should I believe that this new Gen Z wave is going to be the magic bullet?
Why is this time different?
Exactly. We've heard the new era promise before.
Well, that skepticism is entirely warranted, and to his credit, the author actually anticipates it.
Okay, how so?
If we look closely at how the text distinguishes between these two distinct political eras, a clear theory of change emerges.
Walk me through it.
The 2005-2006 movement was fundamentally a destructive force.
Destructive.
And I mean that in the political science sense. It was about dismantling an entrenched autocratic system.
Right, tearing down the old structure.
Exactly. That kind of movement requires ideological fervor, mass protests, and a focus on abstract rights.
Which is very different from actually running a city.
Yes. The problem is that the skill set required to tear down a monarchy is entirely different from the skill set required to manage a municipal budget or streamline a supply chain.
I mean, you can't protest a power grid into existence.
Precisely the point the author is making.
Oh, wow.
The text argues that the Gen Z Krantis is completely divorced from those old ideological battles.
It's a new mindset.
Totally. This new movement is driven by a younger generation that grew up globally connected.
They're for smartphones.
They have smartphones, they can see the baseline living standards in Seoul or Tokyo or Silicon Valley.
They know what's possible.
Right. They aren't interested in debating 20th century political theory.
So what are they demanding?
They're demanding execution. They want the trash picked up, they want the roads paved without the funds disappearing into a patronage network, and they want high-speed internet.
But wait, even with a strong mandate from the youth, building massive, hyper-advanced tech infrastructure requires immense supply chain logistics.
It's a huge undertaking.
Logistics that a developing nation might currently lack. I mean, you need specialized labor, complex import agreements for advanced silicon, and deep bureaucratic efficiency.
All of the above, yeah.
How does youth enthusiasm solve a fundamental supply chain problem?
Well, it doesn't solve the physical supply chain directly,
Okay,
but it solves the policy bottleneck that prevents the supply chain from forming.
meaning the government gets out of the way.
Or actually helps. The text uses the mandate given to leaders like Mayor Balin Shah as a proof of concept to international observers.
The signal to investors.
Exactly. It signals that the political capital in the country has fundamentally shifted. If a leader focuses on pragmatic, results-oriented administration, the populace will heavily reward them.
Instead of punishing them for ideological impurity.
Right. This provides the political cover necessary for the national government to push through aggressive pro-business reforms without facing massive populist backlash.
Because the people just want results.
Yes. The author is arguing that for the first time in modern history, the day-to-day enforcement of policy is actually aligning with the desire for rapid development.
Okay, assuming the political foundation hold, we need to look at the actual engine of this proposal.
The core economic driver.
Right, because a stable government is great, but a well-run bureaucracy doesn't magically generate triple-digit economic growth on its own.
You need a product.
You need a massive catalyst. And the strategy laid out in the text is incredibly specific. It's described as ambitious, capital-intensive, and deeply technological.
And what's the anchor for all of that?
The entire thing hinges on one massive, untapped natural resource.
Which is?
Nepal's hydroelectric potential.
And this is where the roadmap transitions from political theory into hard industrial strategy.
Yeah, let's get into the mechanics.
Because for decades, the traditional development view of Nepal's rivers was very straightforward.
Build some dam.
Build dams, generate electricity, and export that raw power across the border to neighboring countries.
Sell the electricity like it's coal or timber.
Exactly. It's an incremental, slow-growth model based on exporting a raw commodity.
But this roadmap changes that.
The vision here completely rewires that model. The goal is to take that clean, green energy and immediately convert it domestically into what the author calls the cheapest computing power on Earth.
I want to give you, the listener, a way to visualize this shift because it's a brilliant reframing of global resources.
It really is.
In the 19th and 20th centuries, nations built their wealth by exporting raw material.
Coal, oil, iron ore.
Right. Today, in the 21st century, data centers are the new blast furnaces.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Processing power is the new heavy industry.
It's the foundation of everything.
So instead of pumping oil out of the ground and shipping it away to be refined somewhere else, Nepal is proposing a form of digital alchemy.
Digital alchemy.
They want to use the gravity of the Himalayas and the flow of their rivers to run server farms.
Right on site.
Right on site. They aren't going to export electricity, they're going to export pure computation.
And when we break down the physics and the economics of the current global tech landscape, the brilliance of this strategy becomes obvious.
Because of the bottleneck.
Exactly. Right now, there is a massive bottleneck in the global race to develop artificial intelligence, and it isn't what most people think it is.
It's not the code.
No. The limiting factor isn't a lack of brilliant software engineers. It isn't even a shortage of advanced silicon chips, although that supply chain is heavily strained.
Circling everything back.
The absolute, undeniable bottleneck of the AI revolution is energy.
Let's dive into why that is.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're using a large language model on your phone, it feels effortless.
It feels like magic.
You type a prompt, you get an answer. But the physical reality of what's happening behind the screen is staggering.
The compute cost is massive.
Training an AI model requires thousands of specialized processors running at maximum capacity for months at a time. The amount of electricity drawn by these facilities is just mind-boggling.
And it's not just the energy required to power the processors themselves.
Right, there's a secondary cost.
A huge one. When you run thousands of chips at maximum capacity, they generate an immense amount of heat.
Anyone with a laptop on their knees knows this.
Exactly. So for every megawatt of power you use to run the computers, you need another massive amount of energy just to run the industrial cooling system so the servers don't literally melt down.
You have to keep the room freezing.
Yeah. And as tech giants scale their AI ambitions, they are starting to overwhelm national power grids.
I've read about this.
We are seeing data center projects paused in developed nations because the local grid simply cannot guarantee the wattage required.
Which brings us back to the geographic advantage of this blueprint.
The Himalayas.
Right. You mentioned cooling. If you build a data center in a hot climate, like the desert, you spend a fortune on air conditioning.
It's terribly inefficient.
But if you build it high up in the Himalayas, where the ambient temperature is naturally low, you drastically reduce your cooling costs.
Free cooling from nature.
Exactly. You pair that natural cooling with abundant, ultra-cheap hydroelectric power right from the source, and suddenly you have solved the biggest, most expensive problem facing the tech industry today.
The author refers to this as a structural edge over nearly every competitor.
A structural edge.
Because the power is hydroelectric, it is infinitely renewable.
No emissions.
And it isn't subject to the geopolitical price shocks of oil or natural gas.
You're not relying on global fossil fuel markets.
Right. By offering this specific combination, cheap power, natural cooling, and massive scale, the text outlines a strategy where Nepal doesn't just participate in the digital economy.
What do they become?
It becomes an indispensable foundational layer of it. They are transforming complex geography into supreme digital infrastructure.
That sets the stage perfectly for the absolute centerpiece of this entire deep dive.
Yes, the company itself.
We have the political mandate, and we have the energy economics mapped out. So how does this abstract concept become a tangible, revenue-generating reality?
What's the vehicle?
The blueprint proposes the creation of a singular corporate entity, Project Solara.
Solara. And this is envisioned as a homegrown Silicon Valley-style tech champion.
Not a government agency.
No, a private corporation. And this is where the ambition of the document reaches its peak.
Prepare yourselves for this number.
The stated goal is to build Solara to a valuation of $1 trillion within a single decade.
We really need to pause and absorb the sheer weight of that number. $1 trillion valuation.
It's astronomical.
That is a market cap reserved for a tiny elite fraction of the most dominant companies in human history.
It's a very exclusive club.
We are talking about the airspace occupied by Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, NVIDIA.
The giant.
It took those companies decades of relentless innovation and global market dominance to reach that milestone. To read a blog post claiming that a startup launched in an emerging economy can hit $1 trillion in 10 years. I mean, it sounds absurd on its face.
It sounds like pure fiction.
Right. Is this just pure startup hyperbole? A flashy number designed to generate clicks? Or is there an actual mathematical mechanism being proposed to back this up?
It is entirely natural to look at $1 trillion projection and dismiss it as fantasy.
Especially in 10 years.
Exactly. But if we analyze the specific architecture the author proposes for Solara, we realize this isn't framed as a traditional startup.
Okay, so it's not a couple of kids in a garage.
No. The text clearly states, and I quote, "This is not wishful thinking. It is an engineering and governance challenge."
An engineering challenge.
Yes. The author isn't hoping to invent the next great consumer app. They are proposing a massive industrial fusion of 4 highly specific, highly potent ingredients.
Okay, let's lay those ingredients out on the table. The first one is human capital.
The talent pool.
The text emphasizes leveraging the vast Nepali diaspora.
And this directly addresses a chronic issue for developing economies.
The brain drain.
Exactly. Historically, the most talented engineers, scientists, and executives from Nepal have emigrated to the United States, Europe, or the Gulf in search of better opportunities.
Taking all that education and skill with them.
Right. Solara is explicitly designed to be the gravitational force that reverses that flow.
Bring them back.
It aims to integrate top-tier diaspora talent people who have already succeeded in the hyper-competitive tech hubs of the world into the leadership and engineering core of this new company.
Okay, so you have world-class, globally experienced talent. That's ingredient 1.
What's 2?
The second ingredient is the cutting-edge infrastructure,
Right.
turning the rivers into compute power, which we just explored.
Right, the data centers.
The third is the ultra-cheap green energy that makes that compute power the most cost-effective on the planet.
The hydro advantage.
Right. But it's the fourth ingredient that takes this from a nice idea to $1 trillion velocity.
The capital.
The text calls for integrating Gulf capital.
And the sovereign wealth funds of the Gulf states are arguably the most important pools of capital on the planet right now.
They have deep, deep pockets.
Unbelievably deep. These funds, managed by countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, hold trillions of dollars generated from decades of fossil fuel exports.
The oil money.
Yes. But their current, most urgent macroeconomic mandate is diversification.
Because they know the oil won't last forever.
Exactly. They know the post-oil era is coming, and they are aggressively hunting for high-growth, strategic, post-carbon investments.
They want to own the next era.
They are actively trying to buy their way into the future of technology.
So we have a, geopolitical matchmaking scenario here.
A perfect marriage.
On one side, you have Gulf sovereign wealth funds with effectively unlimited capital, desperately looking for green tech and AI infrastructure to invest in.
And on the other side,
you have a blueprint in Nepal offering unparalleled, sustainable energy and a plan to build the exact AI data centers the world needs.
When you look at the mechanics of bringing those two forces together, the trillion-dollar valuation starts to seem less like a startup fantasy and more like an infrastructure rollout.
Because the money is guaranteed.
Exactly. When a company is backed by the bottomless capital of a sovereign wealth fund, it doesn't have to follow the slow, incremental growth curve of a traditional business.
You don't have to bootstrap.
It doesn't have to worry about running out of cash while building its first data center. It can scale globally from day one.
The velocity is instant.
The author's mechanism for that trillion-dollar figure is the unprecedented velocity that occurs when you combine sovereign capital with structural energy advantages.
But every massive engine needs a spark to get it turning.
True.
You don't just walk into the headquarters of a sovereign wealth fund in Riyadh or Dubai with a printed blog post and ask for a $50 billion wire transfer.
They'd laugh you out of the room.
Right. So how does this massive blueprint actually fund its first steps?
This is perhaps the most fascinating and, honestly, counterintuitive part of the entire document.
Really? How so?
The text outlines a highly phased, meticulously structured funding mechanism. The immediate stated goal to ignite this vision is to raise a $100 million seed round at a $1 billion pre-money valuation.
Hold on. For anyone who doesn't spend their days reading venture capital term sheets, let's clarify what that actually means.
Good idea.
A seed round is the very first official money a company raises to prove its concept.
The startup cash.
Right. A pre-money valuation is what the company is agreed to be worth before that new cash is deposited in the bank.
So before they even start building.
Exactly. So the author is saying Solara, essentially as an idea and an initial team, is worth $1 billion, and they want investors to buy 10% of the company for $100 million.
Right.
That is a monstrously large seed round. Most seed rounds are what, maybe a couple of million?
Yes, it is an astronomically aggressive valuation for an early-stage venture. But here is the paradox that makes the strategy so intriguing.
What's the paradox?
Despite wanting to raise $100 million, the initial specific action item requested in the text isn't aimed at institutional investors at all.
Wait, really? Who are they asking?
The author makes a direct, incredibly targeted appeal. They are looking for exactly 5 Nepali professionals or entrepreneurs based in the United States to act as angel investors.
Just 5 people.
Exactly 5, and the requested commitment is exactly $20,000 each.
That is the scale paradox that absolutely blew my mind when I read the source material.
It's wild, right?
It's like announcing you are going to build a new international airport, but you're starting a GoFundMe to buy the first bag of cement.
That's a great way to put it.
5 people writing $20,000 checks equals $100,000. That is a rounding error compared to the $100 million seed goal, let alone the $1 trillion endgame.
It's tiny.
Why go through the effort of structuring this tiny, specific ask?
Because the purpose of that initial $100,000 isn't to buy concrete or server racks.
Okay, then what is it for?
The author is utilizing a classic strategy of social proof and validation. I look at this $20,000 ask not as funding, but as a mechanism to secure skin in the game from the most critical demographic.
I see it like taking a core sample.
A core sample.
Yeah. If you want to convince a massive mining corporation to invest $1 billion to dig a mine, you don't just show them a map.
Right, they need proof.
You drill a tiny hole, pull up a small cylinder of rock, and show them the gold running through it. The $100,000 is the core sample.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. The text specifically targets the U.S.-based diaspora.
The people who already made it.
Exactly. These are individuals who understand the rigorous demands of the American tech and business sectors. They understand AI, and they understand venture capital.
They know what a good deal looks like.
Yes. If the author can convince 5 of these highly credentialed individuals to put their own personal capital on the line, a modest sum like $20,000, it sends a deafening signal to the rest of the market.
It's a stamp of approval.
It proves that the people who understand the technology and the culture best believe in the vision enough to open their own wallets.
And the document includes a projection to sweeten the deal for those 5 initial angels.
Oh, the return projection.
Yeah. It claims that on a conservative trajectory, if Solara hits its milestones, that initial $20,000 stake could be worth $20 million in 10 years.
Which is a 1,000x return.
Not bad for 20 grand.
Mathematically, that is the reality of getting in on the absolute ground floor of a company that scales to $1 trillion.
Okay, cool it off.
Right. But the strategic brilliance is that once those 5 angels are secured, the narrative shifts entirely.
It's not just a blog post anymore.
Exactly. The project is no longer just a theory. It is a capitalized entity, validated and backed by successful tech diaspora.
And that is when you take the core sample to the Gulf.
Precisely. When you finally walk into the room with the sovereign wealth managers, you aren't pitching an idea.
You're presenting a real company.
You are presenting a validated, culturally aligned vehicle that has secured top-tier talent and is perfectly positioned to monopolize the cheapest AI energy on Earth.
It's all about stepping stones.
The initial 100 grand is the tiny key that unlocks the $100 million door, which in turn unlocks the billions required for massive infrastructure.
So let's run the simulation forward.
Okay, let's assume it works.
Let's imagine the spark plug works. The diaspora angels fund the initial validation. The Gulf capital flows in like a tidal wave. The hydro dams are linked to massive hunting data centers. And Solara actually pulls it off.
They hit the trillion.
They hit the trillion-dollar valuation. The massive wealth generation occurs.
And then what?
This brings us to the most critical question of the deep dive. How does this corporate success fulfill the roadmap's grand promise of ending extreme poverty in Nepal within a decade?
It's the ultimate promise of the text.
Because if we look at history, developing nations striking it rich, whether it's oil in the Middle East or diamonds in Africa, rarely results in widespread prosperity.
Often the opposite.
Usually just mints a tiny class of ultra-billionaires while the general population remains impoverished.
The author is acutely aware of the resource curse, and this is where the text introduces its most radical innovation.
What's the innovation?
It outlines what it calls a new social contract.
A new social contract.
The blueprint explicitly states that Solara is not designed to be a conventional startup that enriches a few founders and venture capitalists.
Okay.
It is engineered from day one as a national platform with built-in, unalterable mechanisms for broad-based prosperity.
And how does it actually do that?
It attempts to achieve this through a highly unconventional equity structure.
The 10-Ken split.
Yes.
Let's examine the mechanics of this because it is wild.
It really is unprecedented.
The blueprint proposes giving 10% ownership of this potentially trillion-dollar company directly to the government of Nepal.
Right to the state.
Not taxing corporate profits years down the line, but giving the sovereign state direct equity from the moment the company is formed.
And what did they get in return?
In exchange for this 10% stake, Solara demands a one-desk, fast-track policy housed directly in the Prime Minister's office.
There is a deeper layer to that arrangement that we need to unpack.
Let's unpack it.
Because on the surface, granting a government direct equity in exchange for cutting red tape raises massive alarm bells.
Oh, absolutely. Let me be the voice of the skeptic here.
Please do.
If a corporation says to a government, we will give you a massive chunk of our company, but you have to bypass all your normal environmental reviews, labor boards, and local permitting offices and just give us a rubber stamp from the Prime Minister, that sounds dangerously close to institutionalizing a bribe.
It sounds like crony capitalism.
Right. It sounds like an unhealthy, monopolistic merger of private enterprise and state power.
It is an incredibly aggressive maneuver, but we have to analyze the specific friction it is designed to eliminate.
What friction?
In emerging economies, the single highest mortality rate for foreign direct investment and massive infrastructure projects isn't a lack of capital or poor engineering.
What is it?
It is bureaucracy.
It's just red tape.
It is the endless maze of permitting, the contradictory regulations issued by different ministries, and the petty delays that stretch a 6-month timeline into a 5-year nightmare.
All right.
Investors cannot model for indefinite bureaucratic delay.
But a traditional multinational corporation would just deploy an army of lobbyists and lawyers to grind through that friction over a decade.
True, but Solara needs to scale rapidly.
They don't have a decade to waste on permits.
Exactly. So the author proposes aligning the financial incentives of the state directly with the velocity of the corporation.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Bureaucracy thrives when gatekeepers have no stake in the final outcome. But if the government itself is a literal 10% shareholder, the state's own financial future becomes inextricably linked to how fast the data centers are built. Suddenly, the government is fiercely incentivized to provide policy certainty, absolute efficiency, and zero administrative drag.
They want the servers online as fast as the company does.
The one-desk policy means Solara doesn't negotiate with 50 different regional bureaucrats.
Will you skip the line?
They deal directly with the executive branch, whose own portfolio grows every time a server comes online.
It's a breathtaking alignment of incentives. You are essentially turning the state from a regulator into a co-founder.
Precisely.
But that is only the first half of the equation. That 10% aligns the government.
What about the people?
Right. The second 10% of this equity split is where the poverty alleviation mechanism lives.
This is the crucial part.
The text mandates that another 10% of Solara goes directly into a dedicated foundation.
A foundation.
And this foundation has one sole, irrevocable mandate: direct cash transfers to the poorest 20% of Nepali citizens.
This is the realization of the roadmap's core promise.
It's written right into the DNA of the company.
Yes. By carving out a massive block of equity for this foundation, the author creates a direct, mathematically hardwired link between global technological supremacy and on-the-ground welfare.
We need to talk about the economics of this. It's essentially proposing a universal basic income, a UBI.
Yes, effectively.
But instead of funding that UBI by raising taxes on the middle class or printing fiat currency, you are funding it directly with the revenue generated by global AI compute.
Which is external revenue.
Right. As the worldwide demand for artificial intelligence processing increases, the value of Solara rises, the dividends paid to the foundation increase, and the physical cash transferred to the poorest citizens scales up automatically.
It completely bypasses the traditional trickle-down economic model, which has consistently failed to reach the most vulnerable populations in developing contexts.
Because usually gets stuck at the top.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The wealth isn't expected to trickle down through job creation or secondary markets.
It's a direct pipeline.
It is distributed directly from the foundational equity structure.
Let me push back on the macroeconomic reality of this, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because if Solara hits a massive valuation and this foundation suddenly starts dumping millions or eventually billions of dollars in direct cash into the hands of the poorest 20% of a relatively small emerging economy, doesn't that immediately trigger a localized crisis?
You're talking about inflation.
Yes. If everyone suddenly has extra cash, but the supply of housing, food, and basic goods hasn't increased, doesn't that just cause hyperinflation?
Too much money chasing too few goods.
Don't you just drive up the price of rice and rent, effectively neutralizing the cash transfer?
That is the classic inflationary critique of UBI, and it is a massive challenge.
It happens all the time.
However, the text's architecture suggests a different outcome if managed correctly.
How so?
First, the influx of capital is coming from external global revenue tech companies paying for compute, not from the central bank printing new local currency.
So it's real value entering the system.
Right. Second, because the cash is distributed to the poorest demographic, the money is immediately spent on basic necessities, which stimulates local agriculture and light manufacturing.
Oh, I see. They don't hoard it.
They spend it immediately. The influx of demand creates an incentive for local businesses to expand supply.
Farmers grow more food.
Yes. The key for the foundation would be pacing the rollout of the cash transfers to match the local economy's ability to scale its production of goods.
So you don't overwhelm the market overnight.
If paced correctly, it acts as a massive stimulus rather than an inflationary bomb.
Okay, that makes sense. To fully understand the ambition and the architectural detail of this proposal, we can't just look at the document in a vacuum.
No, we have to look at the source.
We have to look at the mind behind it. We need to examine the author's pedigree.
Paramendra.
Right, because if this roadmap was just an anonymous post on a Reddit board, we could easily dismiss it as fan fiction.
Just someone daydreaming.
Yeah, but the source material provides a deep dive into the context of who is actually writing this.
And the author brings a very specific historical and intellectual weight to the text.
He's not an outsider.
Not at all. The sources highlight a pivotal detail. During the massive 2005-2006 democracy movement that we discussed earlier, he was the only full-time U.S.-based Nepali working actively on behalf of the movement.
So he isn't just a tech bro theorizing from afar.
No.
He was deeply entrenched in the political struggle to create the very democratic foundation he is now trying to build upon.
And he was doing the work.
He has a 2-decade history with the political evolution of the country.
That political background is fused with a staggering output of intellectual work.
The blog is massive.
If you examine the blog's archives and the extensive book list included in the source material, you realize this author has been meticulously building out this theory for years.
Decades, really.
The blog itself has thousands of posts dating back to 2005.
The titles of his books are what really caught my attention.
They're very telling.
It reveals a sustained, intense focus on the intersection of advanced technology, macroeconomics, and human progress.
Give an example.
There's a book titled Physical AWS: How the Logistics Cloud Will Reshape Global Commerce,
Which demonstrates a deep understanding of infrastructure as a service.
which is exactly what this is.
Yes, it's the exact principle underlying the idea of renting out Himalayan compute power.
And there are titles like Lumina AI, The Trillion-Dollar Sun, and explorations of agentic AI and precigenetics.
He covers a lot of ground,
He's even published novels, including one literally titled Gen Z Kranti.
tying the politics to the culture.
And beyond the tech, he has developed a comprehensive macroeconomic and spiritual philosophy he calls Kalkiism, which features blueprints like the 20% growth revolution, Nepal's path to prosperity.
When you look at the totality of that work, it frames the Solara roadmap in a completely different light.
It's not just a random post.
The author has spent 2 decades researching, theorizing, and publishing on the exact forces, capital, technology, democracy, and demographics that the blueprint relies upon.
It's an entire intellectual cinematic universe.
That's a great way to put it.
Every book, every blog post, every political action over the last 20 years seems to be a foundational brick leading up to this exact proposal.
It's all connected.
This isn't a business plan thrown together over a weekend. It is the culmination of a life's work dedicated to a specific vision of Nepal's future in the AI era.
And that context grants the roadmap a profound credibility.
You have to take it seriously.
You do. The Solara pitch isn't an isolated idea. It is the sharp, actionable tip of a massive intellectual spear.
All leading to May 2026.
Yes. The frustrations of the 2005 political gridlock, the theories of exponential economic growth, the foresight regarding the energy demands of artificial intelligence, all of those distinct threads have been pulled together and woven into this single, highly concentrated action plan.
We have covered a massive expanse of territory today, from the high-altitude physics of data centers to the psychology of venture capital.
That's a lot to process.
Let's take a moment to synthesize the journey we've just been on. We started by examining a nation historically trapped by political instability, and how a demographic shift, the youth-led Gen Z Kranti, is finally providing the stable governance necessary for massive industrial expansion.
Right. We then explored the core economic mechanism,
The compute power.
the pivot from exporting raw hydroelectricity to refining it domestically into the most precious commodity of the 21st century, pure AI compute power.
Solving the energy bottleneck.
We saw how the natural climate of the Himalayas solves the massive cooling bottleneck facing global tech giants.
This led us to Project Solara, the audacious blueprint to build a trillion-dollar tech champion.
The vehicle.
We broke down the strategy of fusing world-class diaspora talent with the boundless capital of Gulf's sovereign wealth funds.
All initiated by the genius of asking 5 diaspora angels for a $20,000 core sample to validate the market.
And finally, we unpacked the new social contract.
The 10-10 split.
The radical equity split that legally binds the financial success of the corporation to the efficiency of the government and the physical survival of the poorest citizens.
Creating an AI-funded universal basic income designed to eradicate extreme poverty.
This roadmap is fundamentally a challenge to the established narratives of global development.
It really is.
Because for the last 50 years, the developing world has been lectured to temper its expectations.
And take it slow.
Right. They've been told to rely on slow, incremental progress, heavy donor dependence, and to quietly follow the industrial path the West took a century ago.
But this changes everything.
This text declares that the era of low expectations is dead. The new global resource isn't oil, and it isn't rare earth minerals.
What is it?
It is the cheap, abundant green energy required to sustain the artificial intelligence revolution.
And it suggests that developing nations who hold that resource don't have to be passive recipients of aid.
Or secondary players in the global market.
No, they can assert themselves as vital foundational nodes in the future of the digital economy.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with as we wrap up this deep dive.
Go for it.
We have spent all this time marveling at the sheer audacity of this proposal. We've analyzed how a developing nation is attempting to literally hardwire public welfare, governmental efficiency, and poverty eradication into the foundational equity of its most ambitious tech corporation.
That's a revolutionary approach.
It is a stunning, revolutionary approach to building a company. But it forces a very uncomfortable question.
And that is?
If a developing nation can map out a strategy to guarantee that its poorest citizens share directly in the wealth generated by the AI boom, what exactly is stopping the wealthiest, most developed nations on Earth from demanding a similar social contract from the tech megacorporations being built in their own backyards today? Why does the trillion-dollar tech giant in the Himalayas come with the mechanism to end poverty, while the ones in Silicon Valley don't? Something to think about.